The New England area has a rich history spanning far into the past. The local Aboriginal people who moved through these lands were from the Ngurubal people. Now, I don't know much about their history or their culture, so I'll leave it up to them to tell their story. Fast forward to 1827, when explorer and botanist Alan Cunningham passed through the New England area, and he found the first Europeans already working in the area. He continued up through to Queensland, where he found the first route across the rich agricultural country of the Darling Downs over to the convict settlement at Moreton Bay, modern-day Brisbane. By the 1830s, squatters were taking up big tracts of land called runs. Many of the settlers in the area were from Scottish stock. Many of the Scots arrived in Australia of their own free will, and with an amount of capital behind them to allow them to purchase what they needed to set up a run. Many of the convicts and poorer free settlers came from Irish and English origins. These also provided access to cheap labour in the form of convict and ex-convict workers, many of whom had gained valuable farming experience in Australia while serving their time. These runs were usually based on areas relating to watersheds. What that means is an area that water drains into, such as a valley and the surrounding hills. The squatters would claim the valley and the surrounding hills and have a good amount of grazing land with plenty of water for the stock. This was the system followed before the government regulations and any real capacity to enforce them were developed. As you can imagine, it left plenty of room for disputes over boundaries with no legal recourse to be taken. In the 1830s, two enterprising young gentlemen, John and William Vivers, had taken up a claim called King's Plains Station. These brothers had emigrated from Dumfries in Scotland and had big plans to build up a big outfit. In 1837, there was a dispute with Peter McIntyre, who was then the owner of the large New England holdings Blair Moor and Boyd's Plains, which later was known as Stonehenge Station. The area in question was to be called Waterloo, but more on that in a minute. The story goes that one Alexander Campbell, who worked for Peter McIntyre, and John Vivers engaged in a winner-takes-all fistfight to determine the rightful owner of the Waterloo Run. Campbell, a nuggety Scotsman himself, reputedly won the combat and the rights to the land for his employer. Vivers had to be content with King's Plains. The Wastelands Occupation Act of 1846-47, aka the Squatters Act, came into play and along with other later legislation provided more civilised means of defining what belonged to whom. By that time, John Vivers had moved to Queensland, leaving his brother William to look after the large station that they had built up. By that stage, King's Plains totalled over 25,000 hectares of prime grazing country, with wool being one of its primary outputs. During the 19th century, Australian wool was highly prized in the UK, as the Industrial Revolution had developed a massive textile industry that could not be supplied with raw materials locally. The wool industry flourished in the New England area as well as anywhere else in Australia that sheep could survive. There were fluctuations, however, in fortunes as droughts, depressions and disease all played their part. As a matter of fact, William Vivers lost his life in a tragic wool baling accident in 1857. In the early 1900s, the introduced rabbit had found its way to the New England area and devastated much of the grazing land. With no natural predator, the rabbit overran all attempts to slow it down until the introduction of myxomatosis in the 1950s. King's Plains Station still prospered through the period, with the Vivers family still in charge. Dr. George Vivers built a Scottish baronial-style castle to make his wife feel at home. The early settlers, including his grandfather and great-uncle, all made do with slab huts cut from timber as they cleared the forests and the grazing land. The settlers usually had few comforts, and life was often lonely, with the number of men far outnumbering the available women for marriage. By 1900 this had changed dramatically, and particularly for well-to-do country estates such as King's Plains, there was money available for drastic improvements in lifestyle. The castle was constructed with locally quarried granite for the foundations and the cellars, and then the rest of the building was made from bricks which were made on the property. Completed in 1910, the house was a great success and was one of the high points of the social scene, with 3 governors of New South Wales and the Prince of Wales visiting. The Prince of Wales later was crowned King Edward VIII in January of 1936. He abdicated the throne in December the same year after scandalously deciding to marry the twice-divorced American socialite Wallis Simpson. Looks like the socialising gets you in more trouble than it's worth, so I prefer to camp by myself rather than stay in Kings Plains Castle. The castle is still standing and is actually now a guest house where you can stay if you want some luxury while exploring the area. Agriculture has changed a bit since the early days, and with the advent of superphosphate in the 1950s, much of the land in the area was able to be enriched and utilised for mixed cropping and grazing, which predominates the area now. The area of Kings Plains National Park was all part of the original station. The park was formed in 1988 and was originally just over 3,000 hectares. Since then, the size has been doubled to nearly 7,000. Mining was another important part of the local economy, starting from the 1870s when tin mines were opened up in the area. An influx of miners from China and Cornwall added to the multicultural scene that has left few traces today. A variety of minerals were prevalent in the area, as well as gemstones, providing prosperity to a number of towns for the late 1800s and early 1900s. This became more viable with the completion of the Great Northern Railway line that gave direct access to Sydney via rail, greatly reducing costs and the time needed to transport everything through the port at Grafton and then on to Sydney via ship, as had been done previously. I enjoy visiting Kings Plains National Park because of the richness of the beauty in its woodlands, its wildlife, the flowers in springtime. It's an amazing place. But if I reflect on the history and consider the early pioneers and other people who have moved through this land and used it for other purposes, that only enriches my visit and really allows me to reflect on where we've come from as a nation and just how good I've really got it in my modern life. I'll leave you with the final few images from the park. Thank you very much for staying with me on this video. I appreciate your company, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.